Welcome once again to Norse Code, the #1 podcast for your Minnesota Vikings. I am your host with the moster, Dusty O'Connell, returning from, extended vacation of sorts. Not really a vacation, but a vacation from the podcast. Alongside me, across the internet, to my internet left, as I say, is Vikings blogger extraordinaire and generally useful, snarky internet person, Arif Hassan. How you doing, Arif?
I'm good. I feel like somehow that title got diminished. I'm not quite sure how.
We can go back to generally useful human. It's still true. But,
no, it's fine, Dusty. It's fine.
I think now I know it's not fine. But I just feel like you've had maybe it's just selective reading of your Twitter feed, but it seems like you've been getting in like some really dumb arguments lately and just like entertaining fools
with full enthusiasm.
With a great deal of enthusiasm, more than I certainly would.
Right. No, I've been screaming headlong into dumb arguments. Mostly on the smart side of the dumb. Like, I'm still arguing the truth usually, in my opinion, but the people I'm arguing against are unusually dumb.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. I think you're shooting over their heads for the most part.
That's okay. I'm not 100% likely to reach everybody on these. So why even send tweets? Why
tweet at all? Why even have a Twitter?
Tweet at all? Actually, that's a pretty good question. Facetiousness aside.
This episode is brought to you by Twitter.com. No, never. So did you do anything for National Relaxation Day?
I definitely didn't although it was pointed out to me that today, the day of the recording, was National Relaxation Day, and it was certainly not a day for relaxing. I'm, of course, referring to the explosive events of watching the Vikings injury report and reviewing a preseason game.
No, I got all my relaxation in before this. This is, like sitting up is pretty much the maximum degree of physical stress that I'm applying to myself today.
It's a good move.
I forecast Stardew Valley in my future and perhaps a glass of scotch.
Hey, Stardew Valley is super relaxing.
It's entrancing. Like, and I don't know why. I don't know what it is about that game. Maybe it's just like the constant, relatively tedious maintenance that gets less tedious as time goes by and you advance technologically. But I find that it scratches the same itch that playing Civ does for me. Like, I'll get into that one more turn, like, I'll just play one more day, and then I turn around and it's like 5 a.m.
Yeah, no, that's exactly what Stardew Valley does. And I think the comparison to Civ is appropriate. Less killing.
A lot less killing.
None, though.
Well, and some surprisingly dark, like, storylines. Like, as you befriend the people in Pelican Town, some of them have dark lives.
Yeah, man, it's a good game.
I can't believe the thing that blows me away the most about it is that like one guy made it.
Yeah, that's out of control. I mean, did have like a template, but out of control.
It took him 4 years, but still, like, one dude like made all that crap. Like, wow, we've at least got this going for us. You've got your Vikings guide that can be purchased at zonecoverage.com and on a click-through link on our website. And we've got the podcast, the #1 podcast for your Minnesota Vikings, which if you, the listener, would care to contribute, you can do so by going to patreon.com/NorseCode. So with the sticker thing, I've discovered that I've been buying a lot of stamps and envelopes lately, like a lot. And so now if you want to get a sticker, you have to give us $5. Whether it's a one-time PayPal donation at paypal.me/NorseCode or a $5 a month recurring donation at patreon.com, which we would really greatly appreciate. At that threshold, we'll send you a sticker. But at the $3.50 level, we we basically break even between postage and like we're just making the sticker and sending it to people at that point, which is cool. We want to spread the word, but we would like to at least clear Tree Fitty on our donations. So $5 minimum will get you a sticker. And now if you go to our Patreon page and subscribe with the Loch Ness Monster special, then it'll ask you for a shipping address. So my apologies to those who donated via Patreon over the last couple of weeks. Zach and Rob and Sarah, I will attempt to get in contact with you, but Patreon is pretty good about obscuring like email addresses and stuff from creators. So check your Patreon messages and give me your address and I'll send you a sticker. But other than those poor souls, all the other orders have been fulfilled and should be in your hot little hands shortly. So please consider donating to the #1 podcast for your Minnesota Vikings. It'll allow us to keep providing you with the best digital multimedia content and the highest quality bumper stickers of any Minnesota Vikings podcast named Norse Code. And while you're at it, swing by, if you use iTunes, if you have iTunes, even if you don't, just download it so that you can go to the page for Norse Code, the #1 podcast for your Minnesota Vikings, which is the current one, the one that doesn't have the Daily Norseman logo on it, and give us a 5-star rating so that we can win our little ratings contest with Titletown Sound Off. A win for us would secure a pretty decent chunk of change for the Mike Zimmer Foundation, a worthy cause to be sure. So pop on over to iTunes, give us that 5-star review, and even if we don't win, then Norse Code will be donating apparently a pretty decent chunk of money as well to the Alzheimer's Association. So we would really appreciate the reviews, but this I think is a situation where everybody wins. So that's is that it? I think that's all the promotional stuff. I already said. Man, I mentioned your guide too. Yeah, cool. All right, so injury report, huh?
Huh?
How about that?
It is an injury report. So I mean, there were players missing, which I don't think are on an injury report. There were also players injured. So I think Alex Boone, for example, was injured. I think Everson Griffin was just missing. And he wasn't injured, and there was no reason to believe that he was injured. There's another player that was missing and another player that was injured. But I don't have. Do you have the list in front of you?
No, I'm just looking through Vikings Twitter. Tom Pelissero had a list of who didn't practice today. I know Trey Waynes was on that list.
Yeah, Trey Waynes, because of the thing that evidently made him throw up on the sideline during the game. It's a shoulder thing. I think Mike Zimmer described it as sore, but I don't know if it's anything more than that right now. Yeah, so I don't see it on Tom Pelissero's Twitter. He did mention that Laquan Treadwell planned to practice today. We also saw Riley Reef take a lot of snaps, not all of the snaps, but a lot of snaps with the first team in team drills for the first time. He had been taking snaps in individual drills, but not in team drills during camp and in prior practices leading up to that. That's a good thing. I'm not sure if we saw anything out of Latavius Murray. Double check that. This is our super prepared podcast.
Yeah, right. Actually, I can speak to that one. Latavius Murray did not practice, and apparently there's still no timetable for when he will, or at least when he'll play in a game. Excuse me, but he was not at practice today.
Right. As a result, we saw Easton at left guard. He's been playing center. He's played left guard before, and the Vikings have consistently been trying both Easton and Elfline at the guard positions, and as centers, it should be a little bit easier for them to switch their footwork between left and right guard than for a right guard to switch to left guard. I don't think anything super substantial on the injury report. I'm not worried about Alex Boone's knee being wrapped, for example. He was moving without a limp, and Riley Reef could be back sooner rather than later.
We forgot Anderson Dejo. Cantrell Brothers out as well.
Yeah, Cantrell Brothers, who's remained out. Yeah.
So that's your injury report, such as it is. So Michael Floyd isn't eligible to play in the preseason, is he?
No, he is.
He is? Okay, so we'll
Yeah,
probably see him
and he
on
played
Friday.
more snaps than any other wide receiver, actually, in the last game. He didn't get a ton of targets, but he played more snaps than any other wide receiver in the Bills game.
Huh, yeah, I was wondering where he was. I guess the answer was the other side of the field.
Right. Yeah. Suspensions are kind of weird because sometimes they prevent you from being at the team facility at all. Generally speaking, it seems like beginning of season suspensions don't prevent you from playing in the season, although I cannot say that's universal. I think that that's largely been true.
Cornerback Xavier Rhodes, who missed several snaps in Saturday's practice after colliding with Anthony Harris and taking a shot to the ribs, appeared to practice without limitations. So that's good.
Yeah. No worries there. And the biggest injury news of all, Teddy Bridgewater. Tom Pelissero tweeted out a video of himself on NFL Network. And in the video, he ends up saying that I feel more optimism around this team about Teddy Bridgewater than I have at any point since he suffered that injury almost a year ago. Which, that's pretty fantastic. He, of course, goes on to say in the video that, there's still a long time. Mike Zimmer ends up saying to Tom, evidently, that if it were 7-on-7s, Teddy could go out there, practice all day, which I think is a super good sign. It means that he has the ability to, throw and potentially throw at, a level that he needs to. I've also heard, for example, that Teddy has regained some of the muscle mass that he lost as a result of the injury, which is fantastic. He's got some drive on his throws, which you can kind of intuit from what Mike Zimmer said about a 7-on-7s. The question really is if he has the ability to play behind a line and play like in game situations and play as an athlete as opposed to as a thrower. That I think is pretty phenomenal news. I should probably write that up at Zone Coverage, but that's good stuff.
Okay, but that's going to be, the key issue going forward. And Pelissero wrote a little bit about it in his story, but Teddy can throw and he can move a little bit, but not really in pads and not really in like a live fire game situation. And I think his ability to protect himself while playing, in an athletic way is going to be a pretty big question mark. It's going to be a while before he reaches that point to even start playing again. And once he hits the field, every time our line fails, which will be frequently, I'll be out there cringing.
Yeah, well, I think that there's 3 significant tests, and I think he's passed one of them essentially by being able to throw at the level he evidently could throw before. So that's the first test. Does he have the ability to plant on his knee and throw with drive and zip? That's the first test, and it seems like he is potentially past that. That's great. And I think that it is a pretty significant question, and I think that there was uncertainty about that. The previous videos we saw of Teddy throwing, he wasn't planting entirely on that leg. He wasn't throwing with the same zip. So that's pretty significant good news. Beyond that, there are, I think, 2 other questions. The first is, I think, the one you mentioned, which is, whether or not his body athletically has the capability to play. If he takes a hit, is his knee going to collapse? Something we're going to worry about in probably the first thing I'm going to think about in the first 6 games I see him play. When he takes a hit, what's going to happen? Is his body physically capable of holding up to the rigors of football, right? That's, I think, the second test. And that includes, his ability to run through contact. That includes his ability to make small movements in the pocket to avoid pressure and hits and stuff like that. The third test is, whether or not he's mentally ready to play. And that's going to be really difficult to answer, I think, even for him. I think he'll be able to answer the first and second questions by the words that he says. He can just be like, yes, I can physically do this. Yes, I have the capability of taking a hit. And you can believe those. The third is, an athlete might say a thing, but they may not fully incorporate it. They may believe it too, but it may not be how their body reacts as a result of trauma. The best evidence that we have that Teddy might be able to bounce back from this pretty solidly is, first, it seems like he's kind of absorbed a lot of lessons about hardship and generally has, a super positive outlook. That doesn't mean everything, especially, again, because your body's response to trauma, but it's something to go on. The second thing, I think, is he's literally played with, like, broken extremes before. Like, he was either on a sprained or broken ankle, and he played with either a sprained or broken hand in the Rutgers game that he originally wasn't going to start because he was too injured to play. They kept him out of the game, and it was, like, raining and all that. But he goes out there with at least one broken extremity and one sprained extremity at the end of the game when they really do need him, and he plays to his full capability. In fact, the Rutgers game is one of the more exciting games to watch because of what he did in that game. And that kind of tells you that potentially, he's the kind of guy that his injuries won't impact the style of play. So that's the third question. And again, that's the closest I think anyone's ever going to get to be able to answer those questions, but mostly that'll be answered in game. So yeah, I think that passing 1 of 3 tests is actually pretty significant. But yeah, the second and third tests are harder. They're more difficult to pass, and I look forward to seeing if he can pass them. But there's still like a long road left.
Yeah, hope springs eternal, at least for me, because I certainly wasn't impressed with Sam Bradford's performance in the first quarter of Week 1 preseason.
Yeah, I wasn't either. The thing that stands out, the thing that a bunch of Eagles Twitter ended up retweeting, which is annoying, but it's still true, it's one of the criticisms I have of Bradford, is the 6-yard throw on 3rd and 12. It seems like really consistently he doesn't distinguish between downs in live play, and he just makes the same kinds of decisions regardless of the situation. It's something that, he was vigorously coached upon in training camp too, where he ended up taking short throws that were safe over long throws that were actually safe, because it is not safe to turn over via punt, which is what he ended up choosing, but it is perceptually safe to create a completion. And so, yeah, I think that was my primary issue with Bradford. We did see some impressive plays that were passes. They didn't come from Bradford generally, and they were generally created after the catch anyway. But yeah, I wasn't too impressed with Bradford, but neither was I necessarily like too disappointed. The thing that bothers me is that we've been hearing a lot about how this offense is going to be explosive. Yeah, it's supposed like you had the quarterback who had the lowest average depth of target in the league last year and one of the worst 3rd and long conversion rates in the NFL last year. You have a guy who even in clean pockets would avert an open or open-ish deep option for a much safer short option. He just didn't take chances. He's the guy who had the best deep ball accuracy in the league and the lowest percentage of deep ball throws in the league. And some of that has to do with maybe he's only taking deep shots that are easy, but that's the problem. You have to take some risks. And in this game, we don't see him making those explosive plays. We're talking about the emphasis of explosive plays that Shermer mentioned, that Bradford mentioned, that even Zimmer mentioned. We're just not seeing it, and that's the thing that you're going to want to see coming out of the preseason. Now, if it doesn't happen at all in the preseason, does that mean it's going to be another lack of emphasis in the regular season? No, but I think it's a pretty good indication. So in that sense, I guess I'm disappointed, but generally speaking, it's not like Bradford's play was bad. The expectations that we were given, I think, leads to disappointment. But also, it wasn't good. And, Vikings fans saw Sam Bradford put together a career year last year. A lot of people would argue that he was good. I would argue that he was good. But, so far we haven't seen him play well this year. Just play all right.
Yeah, and, compared to Keenum and Heineke, none of them were terribly accurate on Thursday night, unfortunately.
Right. Well, Keenum more than Heineke, but yeah. Neither of them were scarily. Heineke was bad.
Well, yeah, he had a genuinely awful game. So you talked last week with James a little bit about how Keenum is likely QB2, but we shouldn't be surprised if Heineke, makes some kind of statement and, keeps himself in the running for a little bit longer. Do you think that's still true after Thursday's performance?
It's a lot less true, but I think that with a good showing in the 2nd and 4th preseason game, they're not going to get a ton of movement in the 3rd game. But in the good showing in the 2nd and 4th preseason game, he might be able to turn it around. His 2015 preseason was phenomenal. That was more than a year ago, 2 in fact. And Case Keenum, I think, is probably tapped out in terms of the upside that he can provide. They both love taking chances. Case Keenum and Taylor Heineke were throwing like they were Cam Newton but without an arm. They loved putting the ball in risky spots. Keenum accomplished his goals. Heineke did not.
Heineke did not.
And almost catastrophically so, right? Because so there's the one interception, but there was also the almost interception that turned into a tipped pass for Terrell Newby. That could have been just way worse because he was throwing into triple coverage. Yeah, good stuff. I do think that there was some receiver error there, but I still think that Heineke made a bad decision. There shouldn't be 2 receivers that close to each other. So someone probably ran the wrong route, but Heineke still made a bad decision. Yeah, I didn't really have much to add. It was more just, so I think so far that Keenum has firmly established himself as being number 2 in the race for number 2.
Okay, so considering how many times, even despite the airing out and the throwing, closing your eyes and throwing directly into a risky situation that happened, how much of the underthrow issues among all 3 quarterbacks were caused by the quarterbacks underthrowing, and how much of it do you think was caused by just bad route running?
I think that there were some instances where ball placement was the issue of the receiver. The one that stands out to me is a throw to the outside shoulder of Bucky Hodges, who looks over his inside shoulder and then has to turn all the way around. Ends up putting just one hand on the ball. Looks like a bad quarterback placement. It was actually really good quarterback placement away from the leverage of the defender. And that happened. But I do think that the underthrows are a pretty significant problem for all 3 quarterbacks. Case Keenum will sometimes overthrow. I will not argue that he has terribly good ball placement in general. Sometimes he'll overthrow, sometimes he'll underthrow. And I think that that's on all 3 quarterbacks, that they tended to put the ball in bad spots. Even quarterbacks even quarterback receiver combinations that are supposed to have good chemistry. Sam Bradford and Stephon Diggs. There was an overthrow where Stephon Diggs had to jump pretty high in the air to grab it. It killed his ability to generate yards after the catch. That's well worth a second look and some criticism.
Okay, so looking at some of the rest of the offense, I don't think anybody really knew or cared other than maybe you, who spoke of him in both last episode and the previous one. I don't think anybody really knew who Stacy Coley was, but halfway through the second half, I think his name was on everyone's lips.
Yeah, no, he had a pretty phenomenal catch for 38 yards, and even if you took that catch away from him, which I don't know why you would do that, he would still be the leading wide receiver in terms of receiving yardage. So he clearly had a very productive game, and in a lot of elements, his game was pretty good. He might have been responsible for an incompletion on a miscommunicated route. I'm not sure. I actually think it is more likely that Case Keenum made the wrong decision than Stacy Coley, but we should leave it up into the air because I think that so what had happened was Case Keenum threw a 9 route and Stacy Coley ran a comeback. So a 9 route is a go or a streak or just your typical deep route. And Coley ran, short. And I think Coley ran it short because he saw a blitz, and so he optioned into it. He was the hot route. And Keenum threw it long because typically when receivers are hip to hip with the cornerback or defensive back on deep throws that are open, and you should act as if they're open. And so that makes sense, but I think Coley may have been correct. But if he's not, that's an error for his game that needs to be caught and resolved. Other than that, really great game. The yards after catch was pretty spectacular. The yards in general were pretty good. And I think that he's probably the guy that a lot of people are pretty excited about. The late round receiver that had a pretty good preseason game. That's a perfect element for getting excited about a guy, developing buzz around learning about who this guy is.
Also of note, Dalvin Cook, high expectations coming into this game, and I would say he fulfilled them despite being left with a playbook that at some points lacked imagination.
I think so. Well, not if you ask the Bills announcers. Evidently, they were complaining about how complicated and how big the preseason playbook was.
Oh, what? Because he caught 4 passes and they ran one crossing route in the backfield.
I'm not sure why they were complaining. But yeah, well, okay, so some people might look at the box score and see Dalvin Cook. I think 5 carries for 13 yards, and they'd be like, "Oh, that's disappointing." But I really thought that he had a really good game. I think that he generated additional yards after contact. He ran to the teeth of defense, and where we often saw other running backs kind of only get a yard or two in that situation, Dalvin Cook generated 3 or 4. I think that's really good. I think that getting hit in the backfield generally wasn't his fault, and he actually did a pretty good job of avoiding first contact and getting to the line of scrimmage. So as a runner, I actually thought he'd put together some good stuff. Obviously, I want him to put together some great stuff. I'm excited to see what he can do. He looked pretty amazing in camp. But I would say as a runner, he looked good, but he didn't look, I guess explosive is the word of the Vikings offense. As a receiver, he looked fantastic. He did a decent job in, pass protection in terms of identifying his blitz. He had one pretty big mistake in pass protection that resulted either in a quarterback hit or a sack. I don't recall. But as a receiver, he looked quite good. He looked natural as a receiver. He was able to create space. He got a lot of yards from scrimmage as a result. So yeah, I think that Cook had a pretty good showing. I think a lot of people wanted a little bit more, and I kind of understand that. But I think that if you excel at the thing that's a negative on your scouting report, you're probably on the positive side of the ledger, right? Because people were worried about his ability to generate yards after contact, and he did do it. He did a good job of it.
Well, yeah, and not only that, but you saw him performing well at some of the things that he was, traditionally very good at in college. You saw his quick feet. You saw how he was able to, use footwork to freeze up defenders. You saw how he was able to create space in, short pass situations. And to be able to do all those things pretty effectively, and also be able to handle a fairly stout Bills defensive line, and be able to, he was able to, like you were saying, pull yards after the catch that Adrian Peterson simply would not have. Those would have been a handful of the 4 and 5 yard runs. I think he had 3 runs over 4 yards. I feel like if Adrian Peterson had been in those situations, it would have all been 2 yards or less.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I think that the modern Adrian Peterson would not have been able to generate the same yards in the same situation.
And how about CJ Ham on that touchdown? That was like he had to swim through literally every player to get there, and he did it. That never happens. Yeah. Usually they just get stopped.
Goal line touchdowns. What are these? It's fantastic.
It's a miracle. I enjoyed it very much. Well, and so one other thing that I think is going to be a little different in the regular season that I'm really hoping for is the more creative use of multiple running backs in the backfield. Multiple backs in the backfield, because you've got guys like Latavius Murray and to a lesser extent Jet McKinnon, and I just think there are so many opportunities for misdirection there. We saw it happen exactly once, and it worked out pretty well in the Bills game, but I feel like plays like that are a good way for the Vikings to really confuse defenses, because we just have such relatively interchangeable talent at that position.
Yeah, I think so. And I think that what's really nice about the multiple back, package is that the Vikings can do whatever. If you put Jerick McKinnon and Dalvin Cook out there, they're equally likely to run up the middle, run to the outside, catch a pass out of the backfield, or play in the slot and act as a slot receiver. And you can kind of pick your poison. If you've got both backs in the backfield, you motion your running back out. You can see if it's man coverage or zone coverage, and you can pick, which linebacker do you think is going to be worse in man coverage, or which linebacker do you think would be poor at covering a crosser in zone coverage. And you can pick whichever running back you want to be that guy, because you get to pick your matchup. I think that's really exciting. And hey, you move a running back out wide, you widen out the defense, you realize, hey, you've got some really good numbers in the box. You still have a running back there, and you can just run up the middle. So I think that it would be nice if the Vikings experimented that with more. I think we saw a bunch of really good stuff with Adrian and Jerick in the same backfield a couple years ago. that it would be exciting to kind of revive with Dalvin Cook in there too. And then, with Latavius Murray, he's a very capable receiver. He's one of the best pass protecting running backs in the NFL. You can do whatever you want with him too. So I think that it would be pretty cool to see. It doesn't have to happen entirely in the preseason, but it'd be cool to see sort of more experimentation with whether or not they think that can work.
So looking at the other side of the ball, Tashawn Bauer was pretty much king of the kids table.
Yeah, he probably had the best game out of anybody on either team.
Well, and he had his amazing game. He posted a 90.7 PFF grade with 5 pressures, including a sack and a hit on the quarterback. And I mean, all of that came against backups. So, maybe don't read too much into it, I guess. But it was still good to see.
Right. And if you think about it this way, there were edge rushers on both sides of the ball that played the majority of their game against backups. And Tashawn Bauer didn't just do better than everyone. He did leaps and bounds better than any of the other backups playing against backups. So I think that there's something there. But I think that you're right. Of course, you want to take it with several grains of salt because, it's not something that necessarily always translates. One good example is Ethan Westbrook was the defensive end for the Rams. He was like 5th or 6th defensive end. He was same time as Michael Sam, if people remember. They both got cut at the end of the preseason. Now, Ethan Westbrook ended up making a practice squad, and he ended up working his way back onto the team, but he may have had the best preseason out of any 4-3 defensive end that year. And so you always want to, dial it down when you talk about, how successful, a backup preseason, especially in an edge rusher, backup preseason game is. But I think that Bauer had a pretty good one, and he showed, a couple of things. First, he showed an ability to create pressure, like you said, 5 total pressures, including a sack and a hit. But he also was a really solid, dominant run defender. He was able to create space between him and the offensive tackle, which allowed him to shed really quickly in either direction so that he could create a tackle at or behind the line of scrimmage. I think he had a tackle for loss in that game in the run game, too. Bauer was pretty fantastic. What's really nice about this game is that the defensive ends in general were really good. Everson Griffin, I think, had a really nice, explosive game. He created a bunch of pressure. Daniel Hunter had just a phenomenal game. I think there was a series of 3 consecutive plays where he moves across the formation to generate a tackle in the running game. On the next play, he gets a quarterback hit. And then the play after that, he gets a tackle for loss. Just really stunningly good play. Everson Griffin, I thought, like I said, did really well. I think that shows that there's, I think, a lot of depth along the defensive line that the Vikings might be able to draw upon as the season progresses. Right now, I think the Vikings are probably in the running as having potentially the best defensive line in the NFL. If not, they're clearly, I think, in the top 3. They did some really good stuff in that game, and I think that Tashawn Bauer's play is maybe the best example of that because he did everything, I think, in every facet of the game.
Well, and our UDFA pickups are looking pretty wise. You spoke to the value of hiring UDFAs that were on other teams' practice squads, and Eric Wilson had quite a game.
Was Eric Wilson on another team's practice squad?
Was he? Cincinnati, right?
No, he's from the University of Cincinnati.
Oh, you're from University of Cincinnati. Okay. Is he?
He's a rookie, I think. So.
Okay. Well, at any rate, Wilson had a pretty legit game.
Yeah, he did. I know PFF liked it a lot. I didn't track that one as well as I tracked some of the other linebackers, but it was easier to track some of the other linebackers because aside from Anthony Barr, a lot of them were fairly disappointing, sometimes for reasons that are not entirely their fault. I know Eric Kendricks was tripped by his own defensive lineman, and that led to a pretty large run. But Edmund Robinson found the wrong gap. Ben Gideon was exploited a lot in coverage. It's fine, I think, in run defense. Lemur was a little disappointing both in run defense and pass coverage. But Eric Wilson, I think, accomplished a lot of his goals both on special teams, which is kind of where he needs to win a lot in order to make the team, and also in staying gap sound in the run game, being aggressive when he needs to be, being patient at other times when he needs to be, making sure that he doesn't get tricked by running backs moving or pressing the lane. and did a pretty decent job in zone coverage. I know that he also did a pretty good job closing down on a ball in man coverage at least once. I thought that generally speaking, he had a really solid game. I don't know if I would be like he had the second best game of any Vikings player, kind of like PFF did, but it was a really good game.
Well, leaving aside the whatever it was, like 32-yard punt, because those are bad bounce. Leaving that aside, how would you say special teams performed?
I would, I think that there were moments where the special teams was pretty astounding. I think Taylor Semenk, for example, just to use more punting, had just this fantastic punt. Rodney Adams was pretty fine as a kick returner, not amazing, but fine as a kick returner. As a punt returner, we had some problems. I think that people will blame him for the muffed punt, and certainly he shares partial blame for that. I think the majority of the blame actually goes to Elijah Lee for running into him. Rodney Adams also had some moments where he called for a fair catch when he shouldn't have, didn't call for a fair catch when he should have. He looked okay as a punt returner, so there were some problems there. I do think that just generally speaking, the kick return unit did a nice job aside from some pretty annoying missed blocks, and then really nothing was notable about the kicking game, which is usually a good thing, right? Because you're not complaining about a miss. So
that comes later. Let's do it for the playoffs.
Right. Let's save the misses for when they matter. But yeah, I think the special teams had their ups and had their downs. Maybe a good way to put it. And I think the downs are pretty noteworthy because they impact players that are trying to determine whether or not they can make the roster.
So at the bottom of the heap, I want you to tell me why I shouldn't be deeply nervous about this year's offensive line.
Okay.
I mean, I know Riley Reif didn't play. And
right. Okay. Well, so there's a couple of things. The first is that I think the interior of the line actually did pretty well. I know some people blamed Easton for one of the 2 sacks, and it wasn't his fault. I think that was just a problem involving communication between Rashad Hill and Alex Boone. I think generally speaking, we can expect those communication problems to reduce or kind of go away a little bit as the season progresses. So that's something to keep in mind. Edge protection was the issue in the game. One of those edge players is not going to be the starter for the rest of the season unless something catastrophic happens, in which case, we're Vikings fans. I guess we're kind of used to it. The only issue, I think, is Mike Remmers, and that sounds like a pretty serious issue, but one of the things that kind of stands out about Remmers is that you take a look at his right tackle tape from 2014-2015 with the Panthers, and he runs hot and cold. If it just so happened that he had a cold day, then we can be assured that he'll have some hot days too. If this is kind of just who he is now, then you've got some worries, but you can potentially put Rashad Hill there at right tackle, and have Mike Remmers as a pretty expensive but still very capable backup. I think that it's not last year's offensive line. I don't think it's gloom and doom, and I think that the interior is holding up well. I think generally speaking, for some quarterbacks it's different, but I think generally speaking, interior pressure is worse than edge pressure. And because Sam Bradford has shown kind of better pocket movement in this offseason, edge pressure is something that the Vikings may be able to do a better job of avoiding. So I think that there's some upside there. But I think that you're right, just generally from the impression from the game about the offensive line, there's some pretty big worries. So yeah, I think that Alex Boone generally played okay, but I think that going forward, you can probably expect a better offensive line performance than we saw based off of what we saw in camp, based off of details like the fact that Riley Reif is expected to return very soon, and so on.
And finally, the $690,000 man, Bishop Sankey, is probably done for the season, right?
Yeah, he was waived injured, and then I think he was officially put on injured reserve, and they signed running back Bronson Hill, who I know nothing about, so don't ask me. So yeah, he's done unless they choose to. confusingly choose to use, their ability to pull back someone from IR. Either one of their 2 or lots on Bishop Sankey of all people.
Of all people, yeah. Bishop, we hardly knew ye. Thanks for the 14 carries.
He looked really, really good in training camp, and then also on those 14 carries.
He did. It was disappointing. Yeah, I had high hopes. All right. Well, that's
this does resolve the question of like, you're going to do a really good 4th round. You don't have to worry about it.
Yeah, exactly. Now they don't have to cut anyone. All right. So, any final takeaways from the Bills game that you want to share with us? I mean, I thought it was fine. It was a game played by backups that did not go horribly. We did not we almost pooped the bed, but we didn't. And
it was fine.
It was fine. And not in like the obviously not
well.
fine.
Jaleel Johnson played really well. I'm kind of excited about the possibility that Dayton Jones could take over Tom Johnson's spot at 3 technique. Tom Johnson looked like his usual self against the run, which is not great. But I think that there's the possibility that Dayton Jones could fill in. So hopefully we see some of that with the second and third preseason games.
I hope so too. So Friday, the Vikings travel to Seattle, play the Seahawks, and make, I don't know, maybe like rude hand gestures at Blair Walsh as he drains 5 50-yard plus field goals in practice.
And a 27-yarder in the game.
Yeah, exactly. Misses no extra points.
Pete Carroll says he's very excited about what he's seen and that after the first couple of days he hasn't missed a kick in camp, which of course he hasn't. Come on, man.
Yeah, I don't know what I always feel weird doing previews of preseason games because, I mean, honestly, I just lack the knowledge of roster depth to be able to comment on what if the, 3rd string or 4th string running back that may not even make the team takes a few snaps. And I imagine that there's, some personnel flexibility in Seattle. I imagine they're not fully committed to their 53-man. So, I mean, what do you anticipate will be key matchups?
Well, one thing to mention about Seattle is, one, they have 8 running backs rostered. I'm not really sure how they're going to split those carries in preseason games.
That's way too many, right? That's like 5 too many.
Yeah, well, but by cut down time, it's 5 too many. In the preseason, I would argue it's 3 or 4 too many. That's still too many.
For entirely different reasons.
Right. A byproduct of this is that their 4th string running back is really good for a backup running back. So you've got Thomas Rawls, Alex Collins, CJ Prosise. I like all of them. Chris Carson, who is somebody I was interested in the draft. They drafted him in the 7th round. Eddie Lacy, you may have heard of him. He made weight, so he's good again, I guess. So yeah, those are, and then in addition to that, they've got Mike Davis, who they got from San Francisco, J.D. McKissick, who I've never heard of in my life, and Trey Madden, who was a guy that I watched briefly, wasn't too impressed by in I think last year's draft class. So yeah, they've got a stable of running backs that are worth paying attention to. It'll be interesting to see what happens when they're lined up against the 2nd or 3rd string defensive line, because I think that'll give us a pretty decent, not amazing test of those defensive lines and those linebackers. More interesting is, well, I kind of hope that the defensive line beats up on the starting and backup offensive line for Seattle, because their offensive line is worse than ours, which it takes some doing, but they did it. Congrats, you have a power forward at left tackle, and a tight end backing him up. I think that I'm excited to see the guys I was following in the draft, like Ethan Posick. Will be kind of interesting. Amara Darbo's been getting a bunch of rave reviews in the offseason. He's a receiver. Tyrone Swoops is converting to tight end. I'm kind of interested in what he's doing. But the more interesting side of the ball, as it always is in Seattle, despite Russell Wilson's antics, is the defensive side of the ball. And I'm kind of interested to see, what Seattle does with their edge rushers. So they've got Michael Bennett, Cliff Averill. Everyone's pretty familiar with that. Maybe the next best young edge rusher besides Daniel Hunter is Frank Clark, who you may have remembered from the time he punched his girlfriend in the face at Michigan and then somehow got drafted in the second round, at which point the Seahawks deservedly got criticism. All of that aside, which I know it's very easy to put that aside. All of that aside, he has been pretty effective in his snaps at the NFL, and he seems like he's a starting capable player. And right now, he's one of the backups for them. So they've got those guys, and then up the middle, they've got some pretty good run stoppers. Atiba Rubin, Jaron Reed, or Jaron Reed, I guess is probably the better way to pronounce it. Nazir Jones, and Malik McDowell's not going to play, but he's probably going to be an interesting look as the season progresses. He had a car accident. I don't know what his long term, like whether or not he'll be able to return this season, but he's somebody worth watching if he does. Either way, you've obviously got the astounding secondary that they have. You always kind of wonder what they're going to do at the other cornerback spot, but the other three members of the secondary are very good, and just a stunningly good linebacker core. And so what's going to be interesting is if the Vikings have the ability to run the ball against them, I think that's going to, especially up the middle, with those run-stopping defensive tackles, with those linebackers, if they have the ability to run up the middle, I think that bodes really, really well for what it means for the Vikings' offensive line. Conversely, if they don't do so hot, well, it's not a death knell. It's a really good, run-stopping group. But then I think we can start to worry because they didn't run all that well against Buffalo either, who also have a pretty decent, not Seattle level, but pretty decent defensive line. If they can pass protect against Bennett, Averill, and Clark, then I think that this hot and cold theory probably plays a role. And then also, maybe you have the ability to adapt. If not, then they better get Bradford the hell out of that game. Cause
right.
Yeah. Sorry, Case, you're next. It'll be interesting because there's a lot of defensive tests here that have a lot to do with the Vikings' specific weaknesses. Now, if Stephon Diggs gets open against Richard Sherman, that's really super sweet icing on the cake. But we have to get to the point where we can let go of the ball first, and so I'm paying more attention to that. There are really good tests for those receivers and tight ends. I don't know that we'll be able to see the full extent of those tests without being somewhat comfortable with the ability to be able to get the ball out in the first place.
Fun fact, Seattle had 9 different players run the ball against the Chargers. So
they only have 8 running backs.
Well, they found a way to get someone else a couple of carries as well.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure Tyler Lockett or Russell Wilson or Trevon Boykin, it makes sense, but Jesus.
Also, so they're just going to give everybody 5 carries a game, and then Pete Carroll will
the true running back committee.
Flip a coin, yeah. that's like a.
You think you've got a running back by committee? Well, look at this.
It's like a
bureaucracy redefined.
Running back by corporate board. Got as many running
back
backs
by stockholders meeting.
Yeah, exactly. They've got enough C-level running backs. No, it's a joke. Like C.
Yeah, no, I get it. I thought you were going to go somewhere and then the joke would hit, but
no, just C-level running backs.
All right,
who'll be playing at C-level in Seattle. Ha
I dislike you. I will say this: the Seahawks do have a surprisingly deep core at wide receiver as well. Very easy not to talk about it while marveling at their 8 running backs. Also, they have a fullback, Marcel Reese, who's a running fullback, by the way. He's not that good of a blocker. He's really good at running from the fullback position. So, really, they've got 9 running backs. Doug Baldwin, really good. Jermaine Kearse, pretty good. Tyler Lockett, pretty fun to watch. Paul Richardson, who knows? He could be Marvin Harrison or a pile of sticks. And then Amara Darboh, who I mentioned previously. They've also got Rodney Smith, who was on the Vikings practice squad. He was on the Vikings roster for, I think, about a day and a half. They've got Kenny Lawler, who I was looking at 2 drafts ago. So it'd be a pretty good test, I think, for the cornerbacks. And, we're worried about Mackenzie Alexander. We're kind of curious about what happens with Trey Waynes if he plays in that game. And if he does play, if he's going to play well against these guys. These players are generally in the mold of the types of players that have given Xavier Rhodes and Trey Waynes some fits. The guys that have the ability to create space, especially Tyler Lockett and Doug Baldwin. Jermaine Kearse can be, a deep ball guy. I think he may not have the size for it, but he generally plays, I think, bigger than he is. And then Amara Darbo, really good route runner, but he's not like an athletic specimen in the same way. But these are all guys that might be able to exploit the weaknesses of the cornerbacks. So to see how those cornerbacks respond to that is going to be interesting.
All right. Score prediction? Do you think we're going to maintain our heroic preseason win streak?
Have to, right? So the Vikings lost the Hall of Fame preseason game, right? Not the other ones?
Right.
Okay, I know they've lost one, but if it's the Hall of Fame one, that means they've never lost a regular season preseason game under Mike Zimmer.
Yep. That's a fun
just
stat,
a preseason.
Right? Yeah.
Yeah, well, it's fate then. The Vikings are going to win. Let's say 20-17. Sounds like close and good.
Well, so is there any value to just like tanking this game and letting Taylor Heineke just like leaving him out there to get like run over by Seattle?
Him out there
because you might need Case Keenum at some point during the season, and like why have him get wrecked by Seattle's defense in the preseason?
Get wrecked.
Just let Heineke throw like 30 throws for 12 interceptions and 7 yards and like 900 sacks.
I see the argument for it, but I do think that at some point you're going to have to play the team against a pretty good defensive line during the regular season. And you only have so many snaps where you can develop the kind of chemistry and team comfort and understanding the playbook at game speed. So they should still, play their starters. They should just be like ready to pull the plug on the whole idea of starters playing relatively early if they need to. They should be flexible, but I don't think they should abandon it.
Act as if, at least for the first quarter, or even half of the first quarter.
Yeah.
All right. Should we take a look at the mailbag? We got a handful of questions this week.
Yeah, sure.
Let's see. Ooh, there's a pizza question. I do love pizza. Oh, man. Sorry, there's an email question in here that I specifically wanted to address, and then I lost it. Here we go. Brian James writes in, sports fans are always suggesting trading particular players, and it drives me crazy. We don't know anything like that, do we?
I can't think of a single person who does that.
Trades rarely happen, and when they do, they're inevitably the sloshing around of the Gerald Hodgeses of the world. You can't really predict it before it happens, and you don't really care afterward. Trade Everson Griffin? Piffle, I say. But enough about me. What fan habit do you find most irksome?
Asking for my opinion and then acting as if it's crazy. Like, I'm okay with you, like, disagreeing. Like, hey, Arif, what do you think of Mitch Trubisky? Oh, I don't think he's very good. I disagree. I'm totally fine with that. But it's like, hey, Arif, what do you think of Mitch Trubisky? I think, he doesn't have enough, seasoning. He doesn't have the ability to read defenses. That's crazy. Why'd you friggin' ask me?
Like, right? They're like, well, I thought you were a sports writer.
Here. Why is one of them a trap?
That's fair. And I imagine as like someone who, studies this a little more closely than the casual fan, it's probably particularly irksome when it's just, Joe Schmo. Like, what? What do you mean?
Yeah, if it's like outside of my like professed expertise, which is football, right? If it's like, Arif, what do you think of turkey? Well, I think it's a trash meat. You're crazy. I'm okay with that.
Okay, that's fine.
Yeah, like, it's food, it's subjective. I'm still right, but like, it's not what you're here for, and that's not why I have a check mark. cool. But, like, Arif, do you think Stephon Diggs will get 1,500 yards? I think it's unlikely. You're crazy!
Just setting you up to fail. They just want to yell at Arif.
They do.
You should just be like, are you really asking me a question, or do you just want to yell at me? Because we can skip the question part, and you can just yell.
Right, yeah, let's just stop beating around the bush. Just call me crazy. That's actually way less annoying. Like, if I receive this is just going to happen now that I've said it, but if I receive at Arif Hassan NFL, you're crazy, and then I click on the tweet to see what tweet thread has created, and there's no tweet there, I'm totally fine. A little confused, but I'm totally fine. But if you asked me a football question and I answer it, and you hate the answer and tell me that it's my fault that I answered that way, no, it's your fault because you asked me the friggin' question. So that's my pet peeve.
All right, do you yell at your doctor when he gives you a diagnosis? I mean, maybe.
That's not fair. I think if you get, like, cancer, you can yell. So long as your doctor understands that, like, really you're angry at the cancer.
Well, no, I'm not talking about, like cancer. I'm talking about something like, what's benign?
You should exercise more often. Like, that's crazy.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, you have chlamydia. What? You're crazy.
It's
just
right
shut
here.
up and take these pills. Here you go. Just get out of here.
I'm not that kind of doctor. Please leave.
For me, I would say mid-season calls to fire everybody.
But they did fire Norv Turner, so they've got a precedent now. I'm sorry, he was forced to resign. No, he wasn't forced. He resigned. He
wanted to spend more time with his family. Very much.
Yeah. I think any kind of fire sale argument in the middle of the season, it's the middle of what's going to happen. It's the middle of the season. You're going to test out your interim coordinator, see if he's fine.
Well, yeah, and take a team like the New York Jets, for example.
Yeah, they're clearly going to fire Todd Bowles.
Yeah.
Sorry.
and so
unfair to you.
But so what if they do? Like, the team's still going to be terrible. Like, it's not it's not like the thing standing between them and greatness is like a bad head coach or a bad OC or DC or whatever.
Well, I like the idea that the thing standing between them and greatness is the fact that they didn't promote their offensive coordinator on their losing team quickly enough. Like, that's the thing. Like, because, like, if you fire a coach halfway through the season, all you're going to do is promote internally for the rest of the season. And you kind of already know who you have. Like, what are you getting out of it? So, yeah, that's fair. Calls to fire the head coach halfway through the season. Now, calls to halfway through the season, or halfway through the season, calls to fire the head coach at the end of the season. Yeah, it's probably fine, but like, wait a second. What if he turns it around? But yeah, it's fairer.
Well, but if fans don't hold owners' feet to the fire, whatever, I can't even.
Yeah, because owners, they definitely respond to.
They care so
much. I guess they do care about. Now that we've heard that the Ravens were canvassing fans for whether or not they should sign Kaepernick, maybe they do care about fans.
Ha! Well, I wonder how that went. Eric Olson writes in, what fuels Arif more, a couple hours of sleep or pissing off Eagles fans on Twitter with Carson Wentz takes?
That's interesting. I do have shockingly good sleep efficiency. You know, I think it's more the thing that's related to those two things that fuels me more is just bad Carson Wentz. Like, if someone tweets out a gif of Carson Wentz being bad at football, of which I would argue there are many, that fuels me more. The pissing off Eagles fans is just kind of like icing. I don't really care that much about it. I have fun in the arguments when people are like, how do you know Carson Wentz is bad? It's like, well, he's bad. Also, I'm obviously biased. Why are you arguing with me? Those things. That's fine, but it's clearly like being able to share how bad Carson Wentz is with the world. That's way better. Now, between if we were to replace that, because again, I don't care that much about pissing off Eagles fans. If we were to replace that with the sharing Carson Wentz with the world versus a couple hours of sleep, I'd say the Carson Wentz thing. But sometimes you do need an hour or two of sleep, like every week.
That's ridiculous. In my advanced age, I prefer 10 to 14 hours a day. I don't get it, but I'm just saying. That's what I would prefer. Even when it's not National Relaxation Day.
Right. On normal days. Get the stressed out about everything days.
Caleb Arndt writes in, are dried prepackaged spices ever a better alternative than their fresh counterparts outside of shelf life?
I think so. Sometimes for a lot of things that you're making, you do kind of want to control the moisture level to even that fine a degree. But that's maybe the secondary reason. I think the first reason is that they actually do offer different kinds of tastes. You just have to be aware of what the different kinds of tastes are. Like I have had fresh basil and have opted to add dry basil, so long as it's not like the dried sawdust basil that you sometimes get at grocery stores. Sometimes it offers like a better taste, or fresh I think is better to add at the end of a cooking process. Sometimes if you add fresh basil at the beginning of a cooking process, like in a saute, you're more likely to like burn it or screw up a dish than if you are to add like dry basil. Just as an example.
Yeah, I would say anytime you're going to be cooking something for a long time, like more than 20 minutes, dried herbs are probably better if you're adding them at the beginning of the process, and they'll lend more of their concentrated flavor to whatever sauce or dish you end up with at the end. I would also say in some cases texture is a consideration. Like ground dried rosemary, I feel like works better than fresh rosemary leaves because they're like little toothpicks.
Yeah, that's true.
And that's no fun. And there's a couple other. I guess thyme is kind of like that too. I'd rather have dried thyme than fresh thyme because, mostly because stripping thyme is a pain in the butt, and I don't ever want to do it.
Yeah, no, that's fair. One thing I do want to add is that a lot of people think that a dry version of an herb is 100%, regardless of the herb, more potent than the fresh version. And that's not true because water is not the only thing that's being evaporated from dried herbs. I hate the phrase essential oils because like the New Age movement has ruined it, but like essential oils are also evaporating and they contribute flavor as well. So that's something to think about when you're determining, and it's different for different herbs and stuff like that. But that's something to think about.
Yeah, and sometimes the flavor changes during the drying process a little bit. Like ground rosemary doesn't taste as rosemary-y as the fresh stuff. Same with basil. Same with anything like really leafy, I think. That's
also, and we'll keep on adding on to this. One thing I do when I'm just having a night and I just don't want to cook, and I've got like terrible frozen pizza, is I'll go the extra mile and dump some dried herbs on top of the frozen pizza.
Oh, that's an absolute pro move.
Yeah, do that. That's a great use of dried herbs.
That's literally the only reason. Well, a very good reason to keep the pre-mixed Italian seasoning blend in your fridge, or you can just make some by mixing together. I think it's thyme, basil, and oregano.
Yeah, I think that's yep.
Andrew Roth writes in, I'd like an update on Dusty's Brussels sprouts, please. The Brussels sprouts regrettably did not survive. Our patio is not a very good environment for them. But the Thai chilies are very happy, and after dealing with calcium deficiency issues, the tomatoes are coming in. And of course, lots of basil, lots of mint. Those don't even really like need any help. They just grow everywhere.
Basil is just... it's prolific. It's like, chill out. I don't need that much. I mean, I love basil, but it can just show up.
So that's when you get all your basil and some oil and maybe some pine nuts and make a bunch of pesto.
Yeah.
And then be incredibly decadent and use it to dip chips in.
Wow, I've never dipped chips into pesto. That sounds great.
It's not terrible. It's one of the most bougie things I've ever done, but it's so good. Mike Raver writes in, we lost our slot corner, ended the season 3-8. Offensive line doesn't look that great. Wide receivers look like wide receiver 2 or 3 from other teams. Help me get excited about our 2017 chances.
But what's the bad news?
Yeah, those all sound like good things. Upgrades over last year.
That just reminds me of a tidbit. One of the emails sent to, is it Drew McGarry? McGarry?
McGarry.
McGarry. He's pronounced it like live on television, on Chopped, I think. And I still forgot it. By the way, he was on Chopped. How weird is that?
I know, and he won.
Yeah, that was so funny. I just lost it. Anyway, so he does the, Why Your Team Sucks. He did the one for the Vikings. It's always the best one every year because he's a Vikings fan. And one of the emails sent in was this question, too. Just consider that losing 8 of the last 11 games was somehow the 4th most catastrophic thing to happen to the Vikings last year. Holy crap, man. That hurts.
It's true.
Yeah. I think there are reasons to be excited. So I do think that, generally speaking, it is correct that the perception that the secondary is going to downgrade a little bit is true. I think that Mac Alexander, as big a fan as I am of him, is very unlikely to match Captain Munderland's level of play last year, who I think was a top 10 slot corner last year. Terrence Newman was maybe the best or second best cornerback 2 in the NFL last year. I think it is unlikely that Trey Waynes will play up to his standard. I think those are both true. And I don't think you can put Terrence Newman back in and he'll play to that standard either. I think it's unlikely. But I think that it is actually fairly easy to counterbalance it because I think that the defensive line is going to be a lot better this year. Not just because they can prepare for Sharif Floyd's absence, but also I do genuinely believe in both Dayton Jones and Jaleel Johnson as effective run stoppers from the 3 technique position. But just generally speaking, I do think the defensive line is going to be one of the best in the NFL, and I think it either will make up or more than make up for the level of drop-off of play we'll see from cornerback 2 and cornerback 3. Andrew Sendejo's improved every year. A lot of people think of Andrew Sendejo and they think, crap, why can't we find a safety to replace him? Which, fair. But also, he went from significantly below average to I think an average safety last year, which is kind of what Vikings fans have been pining for a long time. Like, oh my God, what would happen to the secondary if we had just an average safety back there? And guess what? It happened, and it was pretty good. I'm not going to say Andrew Sendejo will improve again. That's kind of not how humans work. But it is possible. And I thought that he looked, pretty decent in camp, except when you put him in man coverage, which, hey, that's true for Harrison Smith too. So I think that there's a lot there to be excited about in terms of the other players that are not Mackenzie Alexander and Trey Waynes that I think can make up for any disappointment you get from them. Anthony Barr not only looked good in camp, but he looked really good. And that's one thing we didn't cover in our review. Really good in that preseason game, and it seems like he'll may be able to carry that over into the season. I'm already a huge fan of Eric Kendricks, and I do think that whoever wins the linebacker competition, Ben Gedeon, Emmanuel Lemur, who everyone knows I'm not high on, or Edmund Robinson, whoever does win that competition, I think is probably going to be better than Chad Greenway when you go into base. So I think there's a lot of elements of the defense to look forward to. The offensive line is crap, I'm not going to lie, but I do think it's going to be better than last year's. So I think those are the things to look forward to. I'm not saying the Vikings are going to be like an 11-5 or even I think I predicted 10-6, which I think is fairly optimistic. But a 10-6 team, but I think they got better than they got worse. And I know every team says that, but I think they got more better than other teams did, if that makes sense.
More better.
More better.
They got more better. They got it more better.
They got it more better. They get it more good.
So good. Let's see. Alex Goebel writes, would Jermaine Brock need assurances that he would start if he signed here? And if he's given it, is Spielman admitting that Waynes is a bust?
Only in the case where he's assured a starting spot, but I don't think that he would need to be assured a starting spot. It is so difficult to sign someone so late in the offseason. So, no, I don't think that he would be required to get that. If he was required to get that, and he was signed, then yeah, I guess. But the fact that he would sign, or the fact of signing if it does happen, would not be an indication that I think Trey Waynes is an admitted bust by Spielman, because I think it's just as equally likely that they're not happy with the depth that they have, and Terrence Newman has fallen off more than they wanted to, or Maybe they envision Tremaine Brock in a slot role, and it's Mackenzie Alexander that they're worried about, or something along those lines. Or they want to move Terrence Newman to safety, but they didn't have the depth to do that. So, it could be an indication of a number of things. And I don't think that would necessarily be an indication of Trey Waynes. And remember, I'm not a dude who's very high on Trey Waynes, but I also don't believe in reading in things that are not necessarily there.
Follow up, Kyle Slaby writes, if a vet like Brock is brought in, does Exum still have a slot? Pun intended, on the roster?
Maybe not. That could be it for Exum. I mean, historically, if you take a look at Mike Zimmer defenses, Vikings defenses, and defenses in the NFL in general, they tend to have a number total of defensive backs rather than a number total of safeties or cornerbacks. And so very often, not always, but very often, a defensive back added will mean a defensive back lost, and sometimes it'll be at safety, sometimes it'll be a cornerback. Right now, Exum is listed as a safety, despite the fact that he looked really good as a slot cornerback in training camp. And I think he may have had a couple of snaps there in the preseason game. I'm going to have to double check. But it likely would be it for Exum, who is clearly the fifth or sixth safety. He's on the third string safety group, and he's not going to move past Anthony Harris and Jaron Kearse, who both look better this offseason than they did last season. Which, I mean, that maybe doesn't mean anything, but it does mean that it would be difficult for Exum to move up the safety depth chart. If they add another cornerback, it's going to be very difficult for Exum to make it as a cornerback. So, yeah, I think that would probably spell the end of Exum. So I guess that is reading to something that's there. But I don't think it means anything about the starters.
You might say you could X him out at that point.
Oh, Jesus. Thanks, guys.
And with that, we will conclude our mailbag, and thus this episode of Norse Code. Now with 200% more terrible puns.
Great.
Than last episode. And it's only the second week of the preseason.
Be still my beating heart.
That's my goal. To literally kill you while taping the podcast.
I finally peaked. Arif is dead.
Arif is dead. And this concludes this and all future episodes of Norse Code. I was actually hired to kill you, and this is the execution of a very long con. Yeah.
Wow. I admire the commitment.
I'm very committed to eventually killing you. I don't know why I chose a podcast. It probably would have been easier to use like poison or a gun, but
no one would say, well, until you said it. Good job.
I'm the only other person on the podcast. Like, who else could it have been?
Oh, yeah, I guess you don't have to publish this episode. I didn't really think. I thought it was, published right away and everyone knows.
Anything you want to plug? I know you just wrote a bunch of stuff over at Zone Coverage, kind of like recapping preseason stuff. And
I'm going to write a piece on what I saw from Pat Elflein and Nick Easton in the preseason game. They, of course, are at the center of the battle for the position of the guy who snaps the ball to Sam Bradford. What's that called again?
Snapper?
Yeah, that's probably it. It's another terrible pun. We can add another terrible pun, right? You didn't react to that at all. I'm very upset. Yes, yeah. I've got that piece coming up soon. Long story short, Easton only had 13 snaps. He also played guard, but it didn't chart those snaps. So open to interpretation, but Easton probably played better than Elflein, who played well.
Well, there you go. There's a preview. And if you're curious about what the 53-man roster looks like, that article is, for whatever reason, pinned to the top of Zone Coverage.
Still there, guys.
So get your roster updates from Zone Coverage. And for all your other...
Bishop Sankey on the practice squad. I mean, come on, Zone Coverage. Editors. Thank you, editors. I love you.
Right? You're doing great. We're just...
You're great.
We're just driving traffic to your top article. I guess. For all your other Vikings needs, for the best analysis and the most entertaining tangents, keep it here on Norse Code, the #1 podcast for your Minnesota Vikings. I'm starting to get used to the little below average thing, but I think last week set me right. I think I'm going to go full Matt Khalil and say demand excellence. demand Norse code.
That's real good.
Well, and it's just it would be one thing if just like Joe Schmo said it, but to have Matt Khalil be like I just enjoy that so much.
I've always admitted that a little below average was a placeholder, so I'm okay with replacing it with demand excellent, demand Norse code.
If it's what Matt Khalil wanted the entire time he was here and never got.
To be demanded of. I thought we did a pretty good job of that, but no, good point.
He should have demanded them to demand excellence. But at any rate, we shall return next week. One final note. For those who are interested in the Norse Code Fantasy Football League, I pity you, but the...
Why? But also...
Because who needs all that like lush, like dark hair? It should be thin and gray. And watching your kicker shank an extra point and watching your entire week blow up in your face is a great way to thin out that gray hair. But the drawing for the 8 slots that are available in the league will be held Friday at 5, and then draft time and date will be, I guess, revealed later. So if you want to put your name in the hat for the league, then either shoot us an email at norsecodepodcast@gmail.com or tweet us at norsecodedn. Direct message works great. Or if for whatever reason we don't follow you, you can just at us with your interest. And we'll add your name to the hat and draw 8 unfortunate names. 2 years ago, I finished in like second to last place. I think I had 3 wins, and I only didn't finish in last place because I managed to score more points than the other team that had 3 wins. And then,
wow, what must it be like to score more points and not
win?
That would be, it'd be worse. Scoring the most points in the league and not making the playoffs. That would be, I can't imagine that.
Yeah, that's never happened.
Norse Code Fantasy League, where dreams go to die.
Are you still bitter? Because I was just gonna say that I managed to go from second to the bottom to like 3rd place last season, and that basically guarantees that I'm going to win this season.
A position that you definitely deserved.
I don't know what's going to happen to you this year. I just assume whatever it is, it's going to be hard to watch.
Yeah, I'm probably going to accidentally draft Blair Walsh. You're going to set a draft time. I'm going to forget it. I'm going to go to auto draft, get Blair Walsh. Well, it's going to be awesome.
Someone's got to. I mean, I guess no,
they don't. It's a 12-team league, right?
But I don't know. So just don't take Blair Walsh. Actually, I think you guys talked about this a little bit last week too. I think picking Blair Walsh might be a strong dark horse move, because as long as he stays solid through the regular season, you're good. Like, he can fall apart in the playoffs all he wants. Won't matter.
Or week 17, you should be fine. Still, I'm not trusting the Walsh.
Well, clearly, there's nothing you can do to prevent horrific losses in fantasy football. Not even scoring points. Like, the most points in the league will save you from...
That's true. Those are all lies. That's a good point.
All right. That's going to do it for this week. We will be back with a recap of the Seahawks game and a Week 3 preview approximately 1 week from today. We'll see you then. Norse Code is the largest and only division of Norse Code LLC. You can find Norse Code on the Daily Norseman, SB Nation's Vikings blog at dailynorseman.com. You can also find it on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play Music Podcasts, or wherever else fine podcasts are aggregated. Our Vikings blogger extraordinaire and generally useful human is Arif Hassan, who can be found on Twitter at Arif Hassan NFL. Our intrepid producer and occasional co-host James Pagachnik can be found on Twitter at Big Mono, or curating the official Norse Code Twitter feed at NorseCodeDN. I'm your host with a firm grasp of the obvious, Dusty O'Connell, and my name is my handle on Twitter. If you'd like to donate a few bucks to the show, your one-time donation can be made at paypal.me/NorseCode, or a recurring monthly contribution can be made by visiting patreon.com/NorseCode. Please visit our website, norsecodepodcast.com, where you'll find links to our Facebook and YouTube pages, along with the episode archive and some other good stuff. And any questions or comments that won't fit in a tweet can be emailed to norsecodepodcast@gmail.com. And on behalf of the entire Norse Code staff, thank you so much for listening.
Our formula is this. We go out, we hit people in the mouth.